Yes, it was absolutely shocking and disgusting for me, frankly, to see those images coming out of Anchorage in August of this year, where you had a murderer, an indicted war criminal with an active arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, walking down, the red carpet next to the President of the United States, being welcomed on American soil. But this is something we've had to deal with for years, and at the end of the day, change in Russia will come from Russia. It is only the people of Russia that can change this regime, and I have absolutely no doubt that they will come, and that Russia will be a normal, democratic European country.
If these 8 refineries that buy, I think the number is $410 billion of money that was spent on Russian oil since the war began, if they stop buying that Russian oil, in 6 months' time, Putin would be on his knees economically, and he'd be begging for any type of end to this war.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Frontline for Times Radio at the Magnitsky Awards in London. They were set up in name and in memory of the late lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, who was imprisoned in Russia, beaten up and left to die after he launched a corruption case against Kremlin officials. His friend Bill Browder, Sir William, is here along with political activist Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was released from jail in Russia in a prisoner swap last year. Welcome to both of you. It's really good to see you again. Thank you. And we met this time last year at the awards. Bill, it's an annual recognition of people who fought corruption, stood up for human rights. Could you just give us an outline of the range of people who are being honoured tonight?
Well, the purpose of this is after Sergei was brutally murdered, we had to do something to keep on reminding the world of what happened to him, to remember him. And so on the anniversary of his murder, which is this week, we always do this award where we honor people who have stood up to dictators, who have exposed corruption, who have paid a dear personal price for what they've done. And that's the type of person who we want to find and reward and award. And so this year there's 7 laureates. Probably the most well-known is a couple, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and her husband Sergei Tikhanovsky. Svetlana was the real winner of the election in Belarus. She should be president of Belarus. The reason why she was running for president was that her husband was running for president before. They arrested him and put him in solitary confinement. So she stepped in, ran, won. They, of course, cheated. He sat in solitary confinement for 5 years. And earlier this year, just a few weeks ago, he was released. And so we're honoring her and her husband for the enormous sacrifice that they made for their country, for the injustice of them not actually being in charge of the country, and for everybody here to recognize who they are.
Yes, a bittersweet night. And I think, sir, something that you, Vladimir, would relate to very much so, that experience. You've now been free for over a year. How has that year been for you?
Well, it's been a little crazy, to be honest with you. I mean, it's usually a good idea when somebody comes out of a prison to take some time to, to transition back to normality, frankly, because that's not something you can just, overcome and move on. But to be honest, I didn't feel like I had the right to just disappear for a few months, because there are so many things to talk about. There are so many issues that are urgent. There are so many people to advocate for, people who continue to remain behind the walls of Vladimir Putin's gulag. The 16 of us were rescued in that landmark prisoner exchange in August of 2024, thanks to this international negotiated prisoner swap. But more than 1,700 political prisoners, and this is only according to conservative estimates by human rights groups, more than 1,700 political prisoners remain back in the Russian gulag, and every single day this figure increases. The Memorial, the leading human rights organization, co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, recently came out with a shocking statistic that every day 5 more people are charged or arrested in Russia on politically motivated charges. It's a sobering and a shocking fact that today's Russia alone holds more political prisoners than the whole of the Soviet Union did. That's 15 countries put together in the mid-1980s.
Really interesting that you say you wanted to get going and get to work straight away when you were released. And before you were even in prison, you'd been attacked twice with nerve agent poisoning. So a tall order for you. I'm just wondering what you did do. What have you been doing practically since you've been out?
My major focus has been advocacy on behalf of Russian political prisoners, because the exchange that saved me and 15 others last year was the first exchange of this kind in nearly 4 decades, when Western countries who were negotiating a prisoner swap with the Kremlin insisted that that swap included not only their own citizens, held hostage in Putin's jails, but also us, also Russian political prisoners. The last time this has happened was in 1986, when President Ronald Reagan said that the condition on which he would go to Reykjavik to meet Mikhail Gorbachev would be for the Soviet government to release Yuri Orlov, a prominent physicist, human rights advocate, founding chairman of the Moscow Helsinki Group. Hasn't happened since then. But the fact is that for so many political prisoners in Putin's Russia, this is not only a question of unjust and unlawful imprisonment. I mean, this will be unacceptable enough, but it is also a question of life or death. For people like Alexei Gorinov, who was a Moscow municipal councilor, was the first person arrested for speaking out against the war in Ukraine. He's dying in a Siberian penal colony as we speak. For people like Maria Ponomarenko, a journalist who also spoke out against the war and is also in prison because of it, she's dying in prison. We do not know how much time these people have left. And so there is an absolute urgency for Western countries, for Western democracies, to continue these international exchanges, to save people who are sitting in prison in Russia for the only quote-unquote crime of standing up to Putin's dictatorship and for calling out his murderous war in Ukraine.
I think from your own experience, it's really important not to be forgotten, isn't it, when you're in prison?
It's the most important thing. The worst nightmare for a political prisoner is to be forgotten. And what helped sustain me when I was sitting in that solitary confinement in Siberian Gulag was the knowledge that there were good people in democratic nations. People like my friend Bill Browder, people like parliamentarians.
He was talking about you every week.
as I'm very much aware of, and my wife Evgenia, who was just on the road all the time advocating and campaigning. This is so important for political prisoners to know that they're not forgotten, because when a dictatorship puts a political opponent in jail, the goal is not just to punish, to imprison that person, but also to isolate them, to demoralize them, to make them feel that nobody cares. And so it is so important to continue talking about this. And just this week, I had the honor of participating in the inaugural meeting of the all-party parliamentary group here in the UK on hostage affairs and arbitrary detention, because it is high time to change this, in my view, shameful UK government policy of non-involvement, where they basically are not getting involved in advocating in any meaningful way for people who are unjustly imprisoned by foreign dictatorships. I do believe that those people who are speaking the truth at the cost of their own personal freedom deserve full solidarity and full support from democratic countries. And this has been the main focus of my work over this past year. That would be really interesting to
pick up on that story sometime in the future with you, Vladimir. You both risk your lives pursuing corruption and promoting human rights in Putin's Russia. Bill, what do you think your biggest achievements have been in the last 12 months?
My biggest achievement in the last 12 months was Vladimir's freedom and survival. I mean, Vladimir has been my dear friend, ally, collaborator, and the fact that he's sitting here with us, alive in London, not dying a slow death in a small cell in Siberia, I can't tell you the joy that brings me, that brings all of his friends, that brings his family. To watch his wife smile, that's by far the biggest thing that I've accomplished. And of course, it wasn't my accomplishment; it was a collective accomplishment. But this was something that I had really focused on almost exclusively until he was released. If we were to go beyond that to what I've been working on since the war began, the West froze in the first week. The West froze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, and it seemed to me quite soon after that the damage that Russia was doing, the number of people killed, the buildings destroyed, the infrastructure obliterated, that money shouldn't go back to Russia. That money should go to Ukraine. And I started talking about that 3.5 years ago. And everyone said, this is crazy, you can't do that. This money it's not legal, it's protected by sovereign immunity in the same way as an embassy would be protected. And I thought, well, how is that possible that Russia can violate the sovereignty of Ukraine, create $1 trillion of damage, and they can then scream, our money is protected by sovereign immunity? And so I've been advocating across the globe, in the United States, and Canada, and the European Union, here in the UK, other places, to say that money should be confiscated. And it moved in a very slow way, but I think we're actually, I would say that we're probably maybe 3 months away, 6 months at the longest, before that money is actually used by Ukraine to defend themselves.
You know, neither of you are short on determination, I can say that. And just interestingly about the whole talk that has been about the EU money, the money that the EU has been trying to provide in reparations loan to Ukraine, it's stalled at the moment, that 140 billion euros. And it's December that there will be another decision on that. Belgium blocked it. But there's this new idea that Norwegians have come up with that maybe they could actually provide their sovereign wealth to stump up 100 billion euros. That's a good workaround, isn't it?
Well, I mean, first of all, the Belgian problem will get solved. Belgium is saying to their European allies, all the money is in our country. If there's any legal problem, we don't want to be sitting by ourselves in court. It should be all of us together. It's totally a reasonable position. I'm certain that Germany and France and other countries will say, you know, you're right. Let's sign some type of agreement to say all for one, one for all. Et cetera. And the reason why I'm so confident that this money will be transferred is because the world is running out of money. We're in a moment where people don't want to pay more taxes. Governments don't want to cut expenditures. Ukraine desperately needs the money in order to fight off the Russians. We don't want to put our own soldiers in harm's way because that's what will happen if Ukraine loses. And so there's an absolute financial imperative that money gets transferred, and I'm sure it will.
Vladimir, on corruption, Ukraine is embroiled right now in its own corruption scandal over alleged scheme to divert $100 million from the energy sector at the time that it's being bombarded by Russia. President Zelensky is backing the investigation into this. If it costs him his job, is that the price you have to pay in a democracy?
Absolutely, and I'm sure Ukraine will solve all of its problems over the medium term because unlike Putin's Russia, Ukraine is a democratic country and they do have the checks and balances. Yes, they have had a problem of corruption for a long time, just like Russia had, just like many other countries in our part of Europe had. But we know, based on the experience of other countries like Georgia, for example, under President Mikhail Saakashvili and other places, that it is possible to actually completely solve this problem and move forward once you institute the right system and once the right system is in place to make sure that these abuses are controlled.
And in terms of the future of Russia, when you were I don't know where you were when Putin was given the red carpet treatment by Donald Trump, but that must have been a very difficult moment for you. To what extent has that set back your goals, that acceptance of him on the world stage to achieve political change in Russia?
Look, this is nothing new. The West has been appeasing and enabling Vladimir Putin for 25 years, for as long as Putin has been in power, even though it was clear from the very beginning where this regime was going to go. Among his first actions in office, Putin shut down independent television channels. He rooted out the real opposition from parliament. He turned elections into meaningless procedures, turned parliament into a rubber stamp, and so on. He very quickly set out to establish a dictatorship. And all this time we saw, one American president, George W. Bush, look into Putin's eyes and see his soul. We saw another American president, Barack Obama, push the reset button with Putin. And by the way, when Bill and I were working to get the Magnitsky Act in the US, it was the Obama administration that opposed it because they had their reset going on with Putin. And we had the same problem on this side of the Atlantic. I mean, you remember the former Chancellor of Germany by the name of Gerhard Schröder, who basically just sold himself to Vladimir Putin in a very literal sense. So yes, it was absolutely shocking and disgusting for me, frankly, to see those images coming out of Anchorage in August of this year, where you had a murderer, an indicted war criminal with an active arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, walking down, the red carpet next to the President of the United States, being welcomed on American soil. But this is something we've had to deal with for years. And at the end of the day, change in Russia will come from Russia. It is only the people of Russia that can change this regime, and I have absolutely no doubt that they will come, and that Russia will be a normal, democratic European country.
I remember when we talked to you last year and you'd recently been released, there was a sense of a little bit of frustration that you were put on a plane without any choice where you were going, and actually I felt that you really wanted to stay in Russia and bring the change from within. And I know that you plan to go back one day and be ready. And right now you're ready to seize when that small window of opportunity comes for democracy and to establish that in Russia. What are you doing? How are you preparing for that?
And that's actually been another very important focus of my work, because we do know, and I'm a historian by education, we do know that major political changes in Russia usually happen like this, swiftly, suddenly, completely unexpectedly. Both the Tsarist regime in 1917 and the communist regime in 1991 fell in 3 days, literally speaking, and nobody saw it coming. And so many mistakes were committed back in the 1990s both by Russia and by the West, that led us to where we are today. And so it is one of my overarching concerns now that we must not repeat those mistakes the next time there will be a window of opportunity for democratic change in Russia. Because as I think the world has seen in the most horrible way over these past 3.5 years, what happens in Russia affects everyone. For as long as Russia is a dictatorship within, it is always going to be aggressive outside of its borders. So the only true guarantee of long-term peace and security in Europe is a democratic Russia, and that is what we should be working
But what
towards.
is the preparation?
There needs to be transitional justice. Once the Putin regime is gone, there will have to be full transparency and accountability for all the crimes that had been committed and still are being committed daily by this regime. This is something that never happened in the 90s with regard to the Soviet crimes. And here we are today, because when evil is not publicly reflected on and publicly condemned, it always returns. And the second mistake that was made in the 90s was that the West was not ready to help and assist and welcome that nascent democratic Russia as one of its own, to the family of Euro-Atlantic nations, in a way it was ready to welcome countries like Poland and the Czech Republic and the Baltic states. This will need to change too, because the only way Euro-Atlantic security, Russia's the largest country in Europe. The only way Euro-Atlantic security is really going to work is when Russia becomes a normal democratic country that will respect the rights and freedoms of its own people and that will abide by the civilized norms of international behavior. I have no doubt that this day will come, but I think it is important to be preparing now for that window of opportunity to make sure we get it right.
And looking forward to the next year, Bill, what do you hope to achieve by this time next year?
Well, there's one other huge economic thing which could end the war. Everyone says to me, look, Russia's been sanctioned. They're still doing well. Sanctions aren't working. What do you have to say about that, Bill? You're the sanctions guy. And I say, yes, Russia's been sanctioned. They're causing great pain, for sure, no doubt. Most oligarchs are spending all day, every day on the phone with lawyers trying to figure out how to get out of their sanctions and all sorts of other problems. But there's one absolutely enormous loophole, which is oil. Russia sells hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of oil, crude oil. And the money that they get from that oil is what allows Vladimir Putin to continue this war. And so as long as they can do that, he can continue this war. And so then the question is, how do we stop him from getting money from the sale of oil? And it's actually very simple. It's remarkably simple. And people say, well, the buyers of that oil are China, India, and Turkey, which is true. But it's actually 2 oil refineries in China, 4 oil refineries in India, and 2 in Turkey. And so I've got a plan. And the plan is very simple, that the West, collectively, the United States, EU, UK, Japan, etc., go to those 8 oil refineries and say, here's the ultimatum. You have until January 1st to not buy another barrel of Russian oil. Up until then, you can figure out all your arrangements. After January 1st, if we find out that you've bought a single drop of Russian oil, directly or indirectly, you will no longer be allowed to do business with us. You can't sell to us, you can't buy from us, you can't insure with us, you can't trade, you can't do anything with us. If you're a Indian oil refinery, owned privately, this is not a state business, and you can either get some cheap Russian oil and then be cut off from the rest of the world, or not get cheap Russian oil and be able to do business with the rest of the world. I believe, and I think it's realistic to believe, that that refinery will stop buying Russian oil. And if these 8 refineries that buy, I think the number is $410 billion of money that was spent on Russian oil since the war began, if they stop buying that Russian oil, in 6 months' time, Putin would be on his knees economically, and he'd be begging for any type of end to this war.
And just finally to you, Vladimir, on a night like tonight, what goes through your mind?
I'm just deeply grateful to be back here at the Magnitsky Awards, which has over this past decade become really a staple for the international human rights community. I mean, I remember how it began a decade ago. It was sort of a small niche event for friends, and here we are today with a really global gathering of people from all the different continents, and I just think it is so important as a monument and as a legacy to Sergei Magnitsky, and also as such an important signal of recognition for all the important human rights and anti-corruption work that people living in authoritarian states continue to do against impossible odds.
I better let you get on with your good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.